to show you some of the things that my students have actually generated and some of my real data from this year. The reason why I thought it was important to show you some of this data is because, like I said, I've been in remote learning since March. And so I have found in the past that my students and I are very successful in this class because I get to know them very well. For those of you who aren't aware of what AP Seminar is, we are an AP class, but we're on a condensed teaching calendar. And so I traditionally only get one semester to teach. The second semester is entirely for assessment. And this is the first year that I have really started teaching a class without even really knowing their faces, because I'm sure, like many of you, you teach every class with little black screens and avatars on the other end. And so it is very difficult to know if students are working to the best of their abilities, where are their points of confusion, how can I clarify them? And so Scrible has really helped me be more effective with them in the short amount of time period that I do have. So the first assignment I wanted to show, I think, is pretty common between California and Utah in terms of literacy standards, which is looking at the research skill, and then also trying to teach students the ability to evaluate credibility, right? Because so many of them have memorized, like, oh, if it's a .org, it's trustworthy. And then you ask them why, and they don't 100% know. And so I created an assignment the very beginning of the school year to teach them how to use the Scrible, the toolbar, to teach them the concept of the Scribble library, and had them research based on just a keyword that I gave them. They had to select 3 websites. And then of those 3 websites, they had to discern various levels of credibility. So the far left box indicates how many sources were saved in the student's library. You can see all my students saved 3. The middle boxes indicate how many sources they put on their bibliography, and then how many they actually had annotated. And then what I found interesting was on the far right, now I have 3 pretty different pie charts. And so again, if I'm teaching them to discern credibility, I'm really worried about that kid in the middle, because that kid has all 3 of the same types of sources. And there is value in finding the things that are tricky, or the things that are not credible. And so this is a very easy, like, at a glance moment for me. This is so much easier than, say, using my other learning management system, where I would have to go in and open up each assignment and open up each document to see what they had provided, and then keep a tally in my head of whether or not a student has met the requirements or not. So I can scroll through this in the morning and kind of already create potential breakout groups for when I see my students. And so one of the things I wanted to talk about is how you can use this information and you can flip into a breakout room. We use Zoom pretty easily to do some reciprocal teaching, or to do some reteaching with me. Like, I would keep that purple kid, and then I would perhaps let the other 2 kids go into another room to do some exploration on their own, to push them deeper and allow them to enrich their skills. This is something that my students had created off of that assignment. And so again, when I first started teaching this AP class, I collaborated with my librarian. She had like 3 lessons to come over to teach students how to do APA citations and Boolean searches. And I admire her greatly, but I kind of don't need to collaborate with her on that front anymore, because I can do this in about a single lesson, and then just continue to build the depth of skill throughout repeated lessons later in my term. The big part of my class is, of course, looking at research papers and research assignments, since that's what my AP class is. And so I scaffold this throughout the school year, but my students do have to find sources. They do use EBSCO, and then they have to collect them. They have to meet a word count designated by College Board, and citations and analysis of evidence are part of how they get scored. And so this is actually from an assignment that was turned in a couple of weeks ago. I can see quite happily on the far left that all my students started their assignment, which is lovely, because as we know, sometimes we panic when it says it's not started or it's not opened. All of my students have hit the threshold of having at least 6 sources, which is lovely. I can see my bottom student has a variety of sources. Now, here is where I have to then pull a student to do some reteaching and just some check-in to make sure that they're not going too far away from our final task during the time that we have together. My top student has not created a reference page. Yet my top student, on that top kid on that row, has a final paper of 640 words. So I immediately am a little bit worried here, thinking that the student has applied no citations, which in our class, according to College Board rules, would be considered plagiarism. Now, I'm sure this is an oversight, of course, but nonetheless, it gives me a very easy way to check, to pull these students, to make sure that they're meeting all the requirements of their task without wasting too much of their time. And also, that allows me to lower their stress levels. If you've met an AP kid, you know that they're abnormally high strung. And so this is pretty helpful. Our longer assignment is called a process writing assignment. And I just wanted to show you what I created. So in my description, I told the students that they would have to collect 10 sources, 6 from EBSCO, 4 from the open web. It was a 600-word paper, and that they needed to include a title page, a running head, and a reference page. Again, because of Scrible, I've told them 10 sources, 600 words. Now that the platform is going to monitor that for me. And then I've actually also been able to drop in links to the Purdue OWL site for their clarification on any of their APA questions that are not answered by Scrible, which largely come to running heads and formatting. So again, this is a live shot from my students. Again, most of my students did all right, except for that first kid and except for that last kid. So those two I'm a little bit worried about. My third to last kid blew my mind, nearly doubled the assignment. And so that in and of itself is a moment for me to pull that student and be able to try and figure out what went wrong, perhaps, right? And coach them into a different direction. This is ultimately what my students have created, and something I wanted to show that Victor had talked about a little bit is like, this platform is wonderful because it does have that interconnectivity to Google. That's what we use at my school, and so you can see that this is my student's Google Doc. What I love is that as an AP student, or as an AP teacher, my class enrollment has jumped up by 700% during the pandemic. Up, not down. So like I have a lot to grade, and I can't do it in the way that I had liked to when we were in the before times. And so I've actually been able to use an app that I really like, which is to grade, which is to use Mote, which are verbal voice notes on their papers. And I have found, because of using Scribble, because I have scaffolded their assignments in the way that I have shown you here today, is that I actually get to leave comments that are so much more based on critical thinking and increasing their DOKs to getting to that DOK 3 and 4, rather than just nitpicking on, citations and lack of evidence and not having reference pages, which is largely what I would do when we were either not using Scribble or when I did not use it to this degree, because I use it so much now during the pandemic. All right, so I did talk about breakout rooms and reteaching, preventing students from not meeting their tasks. As you know, student accountability and grading is like a crucial component of what we're doing now. And I pretty frequently get emails from either the tutors that the families have hired, from counselors on our campus, or from parents themselves, and they're asking how their student is doing. We know that they're hinting at, why is their grade not better than it actually is? And so I like to come back with, well, how can we better support your student while they're working on these tasks? And the lovely thing is I can grab screen grabs, right, of what the students have done. I can show that progress. On the document that Scribble creates for them, it's just like Google Drive. It has a tracker of when it's submitted and unsubmitted. So I have timestamps for all of that as well. And so it's no longer like a subjective conversation, but rather it becomes very objective. And that's really helpful because, again, it cuts through the stress levels that everyone is really experiencing. And it allows us to really just focus on the task and the skill where things maybe are not going so wrong. On the plus side, we love celebrating them. And so that's very cool to send to families as well. Something that my students wanted me to share with you is that they really enjoy the autonomy. And I know I saw in the chat that someone had mentioned about a similar PDF writer, and my students use that in another class. And I asked them which they prefer. They know that I don't really ever care what they answer. And they said that they definitely prefer Scribble. They have found that the interconnectivity of Scribble to the other platforms is what puts it over the top from everything else. They don't have to worry about making a copy of something or trying to take a picture of it or worrying about their colleague that they had to do this group project with erase information, because they have control over their own libraries. A cool thing in Scribble is that a student can actually copy a source from a library and put it into their own library as well. So if they like something that they're doing in class, they can go ahead and put it into their own library to save it later. It really does build organizational skills. In the early days of teaching this class, I had students who would go to their parents' work and print out PDFs from EBSCO to organize, and it became, as Victor said, just so overbearing. And so this is really a way that's it's helpful for them, since they do seem to prefer tech, but it does have kind of that older school vibe to them where it's much more like manageable, because it does remind them of what they did in the before times, essentially. It is so coveted that I have students who have not been able to use it, that they're borrowing their younger siblings' accounts for their work at university at like UC Berkeley, or their parents who are going back to school are also using it. Again, I like it because it syncs with other platforms, and I also appreciate that it's rigorous. I appreciate that it can push students into using EBSCO and to thinking about organization of argument, as opposed to really just doing close reading skills that are a little bit more elementary. Now, I'm not knocking close reading. It's crucial and necessary to be able to be successful at research. However, some platforms that I've used really just focus on that and don't take it a step beyond, and this does take it that step beyond. If you have any questions, you're welcome to contact me, and I'm going to pass this off to Yesenia.